Tom Mulcair is standing by. Tom, how you doing?
Very well, Aaron. Good to be with you.
Born in the USA, Tom. Born in the USA.
I know.
Not
I know
born
the
to
difference
run.
between the two, Aaron.
My bet. I wish I did. All right, let's start with the story here. Again, this is something that has come up before. We've talked about this as well, Tom. This idea of politicians being harassed, threatened, etc. We know how many have stepped away over the course of the year. Well, now Quebec has come up with something, put a little teeth in a bill that will punish you if you decide that you want to be one of those people.
Yeah, and I think it's really well chosen in terms of legislation, and it received support on all sides. If you go across Canada, the same phenomenon is happening. I don't know if you remember, like maybe a year and a half, 2 years ago, height of the pandemic, Christy Freeland's just walking out of a radio studio out west, and she just gets assailed by this guy, right, verbally. And so what's interesting with the Quebec legislation is there was a good debate about it. And two things have been modified to make sure that you don't stifle robust free speech in a free and democratic society, because you want that. You want to be able to express your opinion. You want to be able to say that somebody's a schmuck and write it and say it. But it's really this harassing behavior that you want to be able to shut down. So what they've done, they've made two changes to the initial proposal. At first, it was going to be the people in charge of Elections Quebec who would be able to bring the charges against you. You could imagine if you just let bureaucrats do this, it doesn't meet the test of being objectively strong enough. So they've sent it over to the prosecution services, and they're going to be the ones. Those are the pros. These are the people who do this for a living. They're going to be the ones to determine whether or not you've crossed the threshold and it should be prosecuted. So that was the first safeguard that was put in. The other one is to actually have something that states clearly this is not to say that people are not allowed to express a strong opinion. And that's what you want to preserve. You and I express strong opinions every day. I want to be able to say that I think that Valerie Plante has been wrong, for shutting down access to the mountain, and I think it's a terrible thing that she did. I don't want to be told that I can't say that anymore. So you have to realize there's a fine line here. But what I've been witnessing myself and reading about across Quebec especially is it's seeping down particularly to the municipal level. It has become toxic. We've seen warning signs across the province. Just the sheer numbers of people who have resigned since the election that was only 2.5 years ago. It shows that we're into different territory here in the province of Quebec. So something had to be done. It's a strong signal on top of everything else. So bravo to all the good folks in the National Assembly on all sides.
All right. From that, let's move on to what looks like good news, potentially, I guess, for Pierre Poilievre as far as, Montreal is concerned or Quebec is concerned. Numbers showing they're running neck and neck with the Liberals here.
Yes, and despite the fact that you and I are talking about the Liberals and the Conservatives, the people who are the most nervous right now are the Bloc Québécois. They know how incredibly fragile their vote is. It's a parking lot. The vote for when you're looking at voting for the Bloc Québécois, it's because you don't have a good choice. You sort of say, this is a lousy election. I'll vote for them. It's safe. I'll send a bunch of folks to Ottawa, dozens of them, and they will, quote unquote, represent Quebec's interests, whatever that's supposed to mean. But, it's a national government, and it's the national legislature. It's our parliament. So I think that what we're going to see is something you and I have witnessed in Quebec politics before. I was certainly familiar with it. I saw it up close and personal in the 2015 campaign. Once the social media, which is Quebecers talking amongst themselves, forget about Facebook, forget about all the other stuff. It's Quebecers amongst themselves. And it becomes very closed village at that point. The whole province does. And it's who are we voting for? If it comes to pass that it becomes super clear that Poilievre is going to form a government, and probably a majority government given the numbers right now, then Quebecers amongst themselves are going to say, okay, we don't want a government coming in Ottawa where there's not strong representation from Quebec. So instead of wasting their vote on the Bloc Québécois, a lot of people are going to swing over to the Conservatives. And look at the polling numbers. In this Léger poll, if you go through it, go look at the stuff from Quebec City. So the census area, greater Quebec City, that's where it's starting to turtle. And that's where it always starts, by the way. That's where we, even though we won Outremont first, the orange wave really started to build in Quebec City. We knew we had all of Quebec City with us before we knew it. We had Montreal with us or anywhere else, and that's where it's starting to turn for the Conservatives. And I think that we're going to see a wave if this continues, and if Poilievre continues to be disciplined. He can be a little bit over the top. Yeah. He needs control, but if he keeps playing his cards well, I think he might be heading in that direction.
Which will, I imagine, involve him visiting here and having other Conservative members, of course, coming here more often. We know they did that.
How many
about a month
times has
ago,
he
right?
been in Anthony Housefather's riding,
Yeah.
Aaron? I mean, this guy knows how to target stuff. When he came in and he plunked himself down in the parking lot beside Fairview, talking about gatekeepers and people who are stopping housing from being built, Look at the Royal Mount, the massive development at Décarie in the 40. All of a sudden, the local mayor of TMR, it's not part of Montreal, TMR mayor just decided, oh, there won't be any housing in there. Really? The developers wanted to put in tons of housing. No, we don't want any. And it's, by the way, it's not going to pester the people who live in those mansions in TMR. It's in the industrial sector of the town. But no, he just decided there wouldn't be. This is where Pierre Poilievre is scoring. Just saying, what is going on across Canada when you get these little tyrants in their city halls? And I'm not calling the mayor of TMR a tyrant. Don't get me wrong. I'm talking about the caricature that he paints of people in the planning department, people who have rules and regulations, and they're just making it impossible to build housing across the country. That's where Poilievre is scoring. He's talking to young people saying, hey, you have less of a chance of owning a house than your parents or your grandparents did. Is that fair? And you know what? Young people are moving over towards him in droves.
I want to just get to one thing here in Quebec with respect to Pierre Fitzgibbon. We haven't talked a whole lot about this. This is, I'm not sure where we are in this, other than I guess he's decided that that free or industrial, companies coming here, I guess, is what I'm trying to figure out, will not be able to make use of kind of gifts from Hydro-Quebec anymore. What's this story?
We've been giving away electricity for years, and we're not smart about it. The key example is the aluminum industry. The ingredient in aluminum that is the most important is electricity. We don't have an ounce of bauxite in the province of Quebec. When you go to Sept-Îles, Seven Islands, you see the ships coming in from the countries in the world that do produce this stuff. But we make it here. And we've been making it here for over a century because we've got cheap hydroelectricity, high quality electricity too, because believe it or not, there are qualities of electricity, the constancy that you can with generating hydro. That's really something that industries look for. But we're giving the stuff away, and we could be attracting really high-performing industries that have great value added. The aluminum industry is kerplunk. Here's an ingot of aluminum. Here's a roll of aluminum. Oh, this is great. But this is not the type of thing that builds economy. So I think that Fitzgibbon is a pretty smart guy, and he's on the right track. The other thing that he's saying in his bill, he's saying we're going to do like other jurisdictions do. We're going to start having differentiated tariffs. So if you decide that you're doing your washer and your dryer at the peak supper time hour, you're going to be charged a whole bunch more. But program your your appliances to come on in the middle of the night, and you'll be charged a lot less for your electricity. This is done all over Europe. It's been done for decades, so it's not very hard to do. But Hydro-Quebec was way behind. They finally, remember when they changed all of the counters, the electricity, that we were counting on our walls, that all went electronic, and they're all picked up at distance now. Now we're going to be able to do it, and it's a really smart move, and it's long overdue.
Tom, are we a little too cavalier in how we let industry come here and just give them the access to all this electricity?
We've always been spectacularly dumb. We just, you look at some of these aluminum plants that we've attracted, and you're sort of going, this, slap your palm on your forehead. Why do we do this? We signed deals with the Americans. Thank goodness one of them didn't go through because of local pressure against it. They're the big losers there. We get to keep some of the electricity. But we ran after the Americans to please take our electricity for almost nothing when we could have been using that as an incentive to attract really good industries with high-paying jobs. It's just a really spectacular decades-long series of boneheaded moves in attracting the wrong sort of industry and giving away one of our key resources, which is quality electricity at a decent price, but you don't give it away.
Tom, last thing I want to bring up, and I'm going to talk more about this after the news at 5:30, Quebec's decision to refuse to expand exemptions to the requirements, of course, of the new charter with respect to French language to CJAD students, in this case, Indigenous students.
This might seem like a bizarre stretch, but when the city of New York came up to Quebec to decide whether or not they were going to buy hydroelectricity, because the mayor at the time had decided that he wanted to electrify and get rid of all of the carbon-producing elements, get rid of the natural gas, get rid of the bunker oil in all of his buildings in New York. And the best place to turn was to Quebec. One of the first things they did, because they had an obligation to look at the environmental, the social, and the governance side of their partner, which would have been Hydro-Quebec. One of the first things they did, Aaron, was check the government of Quebec's record with First Nations peoples. This is the type of thing that happens in the modern world. If you want to be on the stock exchange, if you want to do big deals, people look at your corporate social responsibility. They look at your behavior on these three things: environment, sustainability, and governance. And guess what? If they don't come to the realization that way back in the day, 1977, pretty darn close to 50 years now. When Bill 101 came in, I was there. I remember when I worked with Camille Lorrain was my big boss up the chain. He said to the First Nations at the time, your speed will be our speed. We're never going to force anything. Here, the changes under Bill 96, and it was interesting to hear young First Nations people saying, hold on here. I'm already having trouble holding on to my first language, which is the language of my nation. I've learned English, which is the first colonial language that I learned, depending on where you are in the province of Quebec. It would have been English or French. And now you're telling me that I'm going to have to take full courses in French to get through junior college in the province of Quebec. And Ghislain Picard, the extraordinarily articulate head of the First Nations of Quebec and Labrador, has been weighing in on this. We're not lucky, because we've got Pascal Derry, it's not just my opinion. Within the government of Quebec, they did an analysis of every ministry, and hers was the only one given a failing grade within the ministry. Almost everything she has touched, going back to the tuition debacle last fall, right up until this, she has zero understanding of her role, what she'd be taking care of. She goes against minorities on something like this, no understanding whatsoever of the history of colonialism and racism against First Nations here in Quebec and in the rest of Canada. Yeah. And for them to be saying, no, there's no exemption here, just shows an incredible blind spot. But at the same time, they're shooting themselves in the foot, because this is the type of thing that goes on the record of the province of Quebec. When people are deciding whether or not to set up shop here, they'll watch that sort of behavior, and it will hurt Quebec's reputation abroad.
So I will just ask one thing relating to that. Is this a blind spot for this government, or do you believe this is done on purpose?
I'm so hesitant to use the word racism, because it's a loaded sentence. But let's just say that this type of behavior can put us on the slippery slope to racism.
Okay. We will leave it at that. Tom, thank you.